Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, back from vacation here and ready to record some more episodes. I am still looking to record some shorts this month. If you're interested, please hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. Today, we've got a good one for you. We're going to talk about the Ravens' late round wide receiver drafts and how they have done. Joining me to do that is Ben Mihal. Ben, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me on today, Ken.
All right. Well, Ben, rather than have me introduce this topic directly, I'm going to let you start it off here. Talk about, kind of what hypothesis you had or when you originally suggested the episode and how that might have changed.
Yeah. So the genesis of this idea was based on the 23 and 24 drafts initially, or really the 22 and 23 drafts, excuse me. And basically, the Ravens receiver room was in a pretty rough place those years. And I was wondering why they didn't take more late round shots, as it seems like some other teams did. Now, the real genesis for this was looking at players like, Puka Nacua is obviously an insane outlier, but the 23 draft had a lot of guys kind of late in the draft, rounds 5 and beyond I'm talking about here. Talking like Dontavian Wicks, Andre Iosivas, who ended up having roles on their teams pretty quickly. And I was just like, man, it seems like the Ravens never kind of go this route. Now I'm going to kind of jump ahead a little bit and say that I after digging past those two drafts, I kind of realized the Ravens have been a little better in this area than I initially predicted. And obviously the draft is a crapshoot. We can get into that, but the Ravens have taken some late round flyers on guys. Now, whether they're the right guys or not, that's another topic. But regardless, I can't be mad at them for take shots, and that's kind of the whole point of the draft. So that's kind of high level where I was starting with this.
All right, well, great. Let's start wherever you'd like in terms of talking about a specific round or whatever you'd like to do first.
Definitely. And I think a great starting point is understanding that currently, despite all of this, the Ravens have the best wide receiver room they've ever had, on paper at least, coming into the 25 season. They have a great blend of young stars with Bateman and Flowers, obviously, some good veteran talent. They've got a ascending player like Tez Walker, good role players, Tylan Wallace, kind of different size and skill sets, which is kind of everything you would want from a receiver room. But, I think we have to take a step back and understand that Lamar Jackson wasn't always this finished product that we see him as now. And I kind of have been trying to make the argument maybe 3 years ago, something like that, giving him a little more receiver talent to work with would have maybe accelerated that a little more. You can talk about the Monken influence and things and how that came from. And then just talking about the draft as a whole, context matters a lot. Some teams are more set up than others to develop wide receivers, both early and late. The Ravens have definitely not been always the best place for a receiver to develop. I think we're kind of turning that corner now, as we can get into. And when we're looking at drafts in hindsight, there's a lot of kind of context for players falling or players being available in late rounds that we don't always have. So like interviews, medicals, team fit, regime change with different teams, things like that. So, so I think, like I said, the genesis of this kind of came from the 22 and 23 drafts, and I was really kind of fixating on some kind of sliding doors, like what if moments. And I also think it's important to mention that the Ravens have this great roster because they take late round or hit on late round players in a variety of positions. So, there's going to be some times where we're saying, one of these things can't exist without the other. But I like just taking a little snapshot here of seeing kind of some turning points. When we look at the 22 draft, that was coming off of probably one of their worst wide receiver seasons they had. The 21 and 22 season, the receiver situation was not great. And so I was looking at, starting in round 4, we have Romeo Doubs, Khalil Shakir, both taken only a handful of picks after Jordan Stout. I think you could very easily make the argument that Jordan Stout is a totally fine punter, but you could probably get that exact same value with the 6th, 7th round punter, an undrafted punter, veteran, league average punter, things like that. So I'll let you get in there, Ken. Yeah.
I'll just say it's tough to look at the 22 draft and find a lot of fault with it. If you want to, first of all, I believe in looking to the value when you talk about missing out on players. They got Hamilton and Linderbaum in round 1. That was fine. Obviously, Hamilton, a fine player. Linderbaum, there are some reasons why he was not an ideal first-round pick, primarily because of the position that he plays. Not just positional value, but the fact that you don't have any of the market frictions available to you. You don't have the fifth-year option of the franchise tag because of the way offensive linemen are priced. Then, a more serious concern came in round 2 when they took David Ojabo. It was a risk. I guess they knew it was a risk coming right in. They didn't redshirt him for his entire first year in 22. He got some snaps in at the end of the year, despite having had the Achilles problem that occurred, I think, at the combine or pro day. I forget which one it was.
Pro day, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, but whatever the case, I mean, Ojabo was a player who ended up not being a good pick, and I think the likelihood is he will not be with the Ravens this year. It may be different, but then they got Travis Jones in the 3rd round. They got Daniel Faalele in the 4th round. Whatever you think about Daniel Faalele right now, by the way, Daniel Faalele is still a good 4th round pick for where he is right now as an offensive lineman. I really.
You've got a lot of great stuff in there, and I agree completely. So I'm just going to go one at a time to respond, because I think you made a lot of great points, and this is kind of exactly where I'm coming from with this. So round 2, everybody's going to talk about Pickens, Ojabo, kind of crossroads there. First of all, I don't think the Ravens would have ever taken Pickens, and I think he's proven to be the kind of player that the Ravens wouldn't really want in their room. But that being said, you have a cluster of other receivers right there in the 2nd round. You've got like an Alex Pierce, who is a fine role player and a type of player the Ravens have never really had, a big vertical kind of downfield threat. Sky Moore, the Chiefs go with, and you kind of feel like, oh, this is a classic Chiefs pick. He hasn't really worked out. Trey McBride right there also at tight end. And, this is where you could really start to get weird with the scenario and say, oh, they go Trey McBride instead of David Ojabo potentially. And, maybe that opens up some different receiver options late instead of the Kolar Likely. Of course, Likely is one of my favorite players, and I have a lot of faith in Kolar. Going back to Ojabo, though, like I really liked the Ojabo pick in the moment, despite the baked-in risk. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out that way. But so this is kind of where I'm coming from here, and I can list you off some other, Jalen Naylor, Bo Melton, Rashid Shaheed, all 7th round, 6th, 7th, and undrafted receivers that maybe they could go those directions instead of the Beatty pick. I think draft to draft, you could make a big argument that a 6th rounder, 7th rounder, they're all kind of in the same cluster. That's where the value in different boards kind of go out the window.
Right. That they get picked for need, they get picked for system fit, they get picked for other things. I agree with that.
Exactly.
And the Ravens have done some things in those rounds in the last few drafts I'm not really crazy about by any stretch. I thought the 2024 draft in particular was particularly weak from round 5 on. They got Rasheen Ali in round 5, Devin Leary, et cetera. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to go back one more draft to 23 and talk late round 2, because the 23 draft was very unique for the Ravens because, first of all, they finally hit on their 1st round receiver. Not finally. I'm a Bateman guy too, so you could still argue that Bateman in the 1st round was a hit. I think we really saw last year what his ceiling could be. But Flowers in 23 was a great pick, right in the cluster of 4 straight wide receivers. Smith and Jigma, it seems like he's going to be a really good player. Quentin Johnson, not so much. Jordan Addison seems like he's an ascending player too. But the great irony of the 23 draft is that the best receiver in the draft was the last pick of round 5 in Puka Nacua. And I mean, I say that being a Zay Flowers fan, but Nacua, sets the rookie receiving record and is widely considered to be a top 5, top 10 receiver already. So if you look at the late round picks in the 23 draft for the Ravens, that's where I started to take some issue. And that was really the beginning of this, where they go Kyu Blue Kelly, middle of round 5, they go Saleh round 6. Both of these guys are, borderline out of the league already. And then Voorhees, the end of round 7, they trade back in, and that seems like that might be a nice pick. But, you've got a cluster of guys that are contributing to NFL rosters on good teams with Nacua, obviously, but then you got Yoshavash, who is really the guy that I thought the Ravens could have targeted. He goes 7 picks after Saleh, and he's just one of these guys who's big, fast, strong, somebody that you really rarely see the Ravens go after. And then you've got guys like Tayshaun Boutte, Trey Palmer, Parker Washington, who, we'll see, obviously. It's not like we can really make we can grade their careers just yet. But again, it just felt to me like, man, you never see the Ravens taking a flyer on one of these guys.
All right, they have done it in the past,
They have,
and we
yes.
we can talk about some of those certainly, but tie this together for me in terms of a hypothesis. I mean, you've listed a lot of individual players. Okay, there's players who get missed in every draft. So what?
Right.
They fall too far, and if you knew, if everybody missed on Tom Brady multiple times, including the Patriots,
100%. And so they go back-to-back drafts right after these two that I'm talking about and kind of do exactly what I'm pleading for, where they go Tez Walker round 4 in the 24 draft, which I think is probably, exactly what I'm asking for here in the essentially. And then this past season going LaJohntay Wester in the 6th round, where his college teammate Horn was on the board too. I think he might have a little more upside at receiver, but Wester seems to give you that, kick return, punt return juice that we kind of need right now too. So I absolutely love those picks. So, right, that's kind of the beginning of my saying maybe I was wrong about this after all. Now you go back a little bit and let's talk kind of, 2018 to 2021 range, and they actually did double dip at receiver all 4 of those years. And they did take late round shots on receivers, Boykin was a 3rd rounder. But in 2020, they go Proche under round 6. He's a prolific college player who ended up getting way more playing time than I would have preferred to see him get. And then we can talk 21. They go Bateman in round 1 and then Tylan Wallace in round 4. And Wallace has been an NFL survivor and an awesome player and like part of this well-rounded room that I'm really liking seeing now. Yeah, go ahead,
he's a lot of value currently, but Devin Duvernay in the 20 draft as well, which I didn't hear his name mentioned.
Correct. But yeah, they go Duvernay and Proche in 2020. Exactly.
Yeah. And 19, it was Boykin and Marquise Brown, of course. Marquise Brown, they got value back from him.
Yep.
I think if you include the trade value they got from Brown, and it's really 2 transactions, but if you include the trade value, I think that pick ended up having good value for the Ravens. But I don't know that I can include the trade value in the same way, because it's kind of like saying you did okay on the player when you really didn't do that great on the player, and you did very well on the trade when presumably if you could have drafted somebody else, you might have been more happy with the result there. I don't think it was a terrible pick by any means, but a receiver who's not content with a situation that exists there as it was when he arrived is not a good thing.
And again, this is a fascinating moment because, yes, I actually agree. I thought Hollywood was a fine pick. I really thought there was some untapped value in the fact that he and Lamar seemed to be very, very close, worked out together, all of those things. But if you look at that draft, again, you've got Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown, and DK Metcalf, a good 20 to 30 picks after Hollywood Brown, all of whom have had superior careers. But again, context, how would A.J. Brown have looked in the 2019 Ravens offense? We'll never know, of course, but he did burst into the scene in a huge way. And I also was folding into this, the 2018 draft, where, they kind of missed horribly on Lasley.
Jordan Lasley.
Yeah, Scott and Lasley. But again, you can't really take too much fault with that draft because the Ravens go Deshaun Elliott, Bozeman, Sealer, all in late rounds, who are all pretty awesome picks for 6th round and beyond.
Yep. There's three of the best picks for those rounds ever for the Ravens. They have had better 6s because they had Adelius Thomas in the 6th round, but Deshaun Elliott and Bradley Bozeman are terrific 6th round picks. And Zach Sealer is probably the best pick the team has ever made in round 7.
Of course, they don't see the benefit of that.
They don't see the value.
Right,
they don't see the value. But it could.
Going back a little bit before. So I initially had intended on looking at this just in kind of the Lamar era and trying to ascertain kind of, could we have armed him better? You can't, I agree completely. I don't want to microanalyze every single pick because that's not the way it works, obviously. And, we could also, if we skipped over this, but we could have talked 2020 draft where they go Patrick Queen at 128 overall. You really wanted McKinney, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
They also missed out on T. Higgins and Michael Pittman Jr., 3 picks after Queen, both of who are those big X receivers that the Ravens have never really had. And I mean, I think that would be a fascinating thing to see how like a Lamar T. Higgins combo could have gone. But again, that draft was totally a fine draft. The Dobbins injury clouds things a little bit, but I loved that pick as well. So anyway, going back a few years before this, it turns out A lot of these get memory hold, but the Ravens were doing this. They weren't taking early receivers in a lot of the kind of 2010 to 2020 range drafts, but they did take their shots. You have the Perriman pick in 2015. They grabbed Darren Waller in the 6th round, who, was still a wide receiver technically at that time. And, that's a whole nother podcast there in itself. But, talking Michael Campanaro in 2014, and then, things get pretty weird with some guys that I'm a lifelong Ravens fan, and I don't even recognize some of these names that they went, Tommy Streeter, Aaron Millett.
Yeah, let me cross-sectionalize that a different way. Because you're doing it by year, and it's actually, I think, very difficult to follow that way, frankly. But the 7th round the receivers the Ravens ever had are Justin Harper, Michael Campanaro, Aaron Millett, and Derek Abbey. And Michael Campanaro, for quite some time, was threatening to be the best ever Ravens 7th round pick. It was out of him and the guy they had in the 2012 draft who played defensive line, whose name I've forgotten. But they've never had success. They've basically not had success with any 7th round picks. In the 6th round, Rowe in 1998, 1996, Streeter in 2012, Clarence Moore, that was really a bad pick, even though he had 2 touchdowns in the No That's Ed Reed game, the 2004 win at the Meadowlands. And then Proche, can't say anything positive about that pick at this point. Darren Waller, you mentioned. Javen Hunter, who was around, he was in the 2002 draft, but he didn't last long. And LaJohntay Wester, who, to me, right now, looks like he could very easily be the best 6th round wide receiver the Ravens have ever drafted.
You ever have one of those days where everything's off? Well, Mood can help with that. And let me tell you about Mood. It's the online cannabis brand that is changing the way we handle everything, from stress to sleepless nights, with functional gummies that are 100% federally legal cannabis. Mood launched to make cannabis affordable, accessible, and transparent, while at the same time supporting American farmers growing premium hemp on small pesticide-free farms. Their gummies are next level. Seriously, I've tried a few, and each one feels totally different. The Sleepy Time gummies, out like a light, immediately asleep. The Epic Euphoria, it's perfect when you just need a reset to feel good again. What makes them unique? Mood combines THC with herbs and adaptogens, so you get real targeted effects. You're not going to find this in your typical dispensary. And here's the best part. Mood ships discreetly to most states, offers a 100-day satisfaction guarantee, and right now you get 20% off your first order with the promo code RAVEN. Just head to mood.com. Find your perfect gummy and use the code RAVENS at checkout to save 20%.
Definitely. No, I agree. And that was kind of my facepalm moment in all of this research, because I had done a lot of this initial kind of theorizing before this year's draft. And then again, it's like, you can't be mad at that. And your point of, some missed 7th round picks, well, I mean, most teams miss from their 7th round picks,
Right.
The initial frustration was seeing things like we talked about Caillou Kelly and Saleh. I mean, I didn't get into Devin Leary, which is a pick that I'll absolutely never understand. And, it doesn't have to be a wide receiver necessarily, but why not take a shot at a contributor? I think, I'll never understand when you have Lamar Jackson taking a 5th or 6th round quarterback, especially now the team turns around and signs a pretty good backup in Cooper Rush. So, again, that not trying to go too far down that rabbit hole, but yes, I agree that Wester has the potential to be one of these guys that could be a nice piece, and is exactly what I'm looking for. That part of the beauty of the current receiver situation is they have Tez Walker and LaJohntay Wester in, like, we're not needing anything from them this year as of this moment at least, but they can kind of be in the room, develop, get that chemistry with Lamar established, etc.
Okay, well, here's the question that I would pose coming out of this, because obviously you can talk hits and misses all day long, and it really needs a system to be scored to really look at this thing. But are the Ravens functionally, and perhaps because of the Roman offense in those years, are they particularly ill-suited to develop wide receiving talent? And were they, for a period of time, hamstrung in that regard by total number of wide receiver snaps, by how they wanted to utilize wide receivers, whether they wanted good blockers in the run game or whatever it might be, whether they wanted an additional tight end on the field for a lot of plays, whether they never have had good wide receiver coaching, because they can actually address that with just money.
Right.
But what's the root cause of this problem that the Ravens are not being able to develop any late round wide receivers, or many late round wide receivers, to put it that way?
I think it's 2-tiered. I think you talk Flacco era and you talk Lamar era. So Flacco era, you do have a big armed quarterback who can hit outside the numbers, downfield, etc. And they just didn't take very many swings. And the swings they did take were kind of misses. So I think that's one. And that could be receiver coaching as well. That could have been team philosophy. The game has changed in this time too, which is something I meant to get in there earlier. I mean, pre-2010, you didn't even see that many three receiver sets across the league. And then, that started to change, but the Ravens were not really on the cutting edge of that ever. Part two, the Greg Roman offense, and, we can talk about this. We'll probably talk about this as Ravens fans forever, of chicken and the egg. Was Lamar successful because he was in the Roman offense, or was the Roman offense ultimately something that kind of gave them that jump start, but he was always going to be Lamar? We don't know because they didn't really let him play that way. And you get the Monken offense starting in 23, and he's clearly shown he can go downfield, outside the numbers, complete quarterback game. So all of that to say, I do think philosophy-wise, the Ravens really hurt themselves in this area from the 2018 to, let's call it 21, 22 area. And your point is 100% correct. You're looking at 2.2 receivers in the field on average, and it doesn't give you a lot of time, a lot of ability to kind of develop these guys.
You're talking about the number of snaps per play you're getting.
Sure, exactly. Yeah.
So it would have been a low number, but the other thing I have is it's a low number of draft picks. So in those 5 picks, and you're really limiting it to rounds 5 and 6 and 7, or maybe 4 to 7, whatever you want to call it, day 3 picks. It's not a lot of total picks over a 4 or 5 year period there. And you're only going to allocate a handful of those to wide receiver, maybe 4 at the most over a 5 year period that you're going to go for a wide receiver in rounds 4 through 7.
Right.
Fair enough?
No, definitely. And the whole thing that DaCosta always says is you want as many bites of the apple as you can, talking holistically about the draft, but it didn't always seem like that same philosophy was being applied to the wide receiver room in a more micro sense, I guess, is kind of what I'm coming out of here with.
Okay. All right. Well, I do think they've taken some chances. If you go back by round, let's go look a little further here. Jermaine Lewis, the best 5th round pick they ever had, very first draft of Ravens history, but they otherwise got David Reed, Jordan Lasley, and that's it. Only 3 5th round wide receivers have ever been taken. You could point to that and say, hey, wide receivers could be as much as 3 out of 22. I should see maybe 14% of my draft picks coming from wide receiver. And that has not happened so far by, I guess they're not one short, because they've had more than 32 5th round or 30 5th round picks, I should say, because of all the comp picks the team has had. They probably are about 2 wide receivers short in that 5th round. So I think if you're gonna talk that might be a place. But if you include the 5th and 6th round, they got a lot of 6th round wide receivers they drafted. They
have, and I think my memory of this gets distorted sometimes because of people like Proche, where they took the shot, right? What am I asking them to do? Take shots in the 6th round. Here's Proche. He has a prolific collegiate career, but now you're talking 21, 22 seasons, and Ravens fans are going crazy. Get Proche on the field, right? Like, before we saw him, it's like, hey, we could use some juice. Like, here's this guy that can contribute, but now fast forward a few years later, he's almost out of the league already. He never really was able to do very much. I mean, the last memory I have him on an NFL field is muffing the punt on the Browns against the Ravens. Right. I think 2 years ago. So I mean, right. And I think there's a lot of arguments to be made in a lot of directions here. That for me, I wanted to kind of treat this more as just an interesting, kind of research project. Because the fact of the matter is the Ravens have taken early round receivers in the last, in the modern era. You're talking Hollywood, Bateman, Zay. I thought this year was very fascinating, where they really could have continued to really invest and maybe gone something like a Luther Burden in round 1 this year and really, really juiced that position. But again, looking at things in this exact moment, we're here almost July 25, and the Ravens receiver room is in a fantastic place. And all I can ask going forward is that they can continue to invest one way or another in the future of that position.
I'm going to challenge you in another way on the argument in general that what would turn this team around is more 5th round wide receivers. I mean, the Ravens have been the best franchise in the league talent wise the last 2 years. It's not been close. If you look at anything like DVOA or other advanced metrics, if you look point differential, other things like that, they're the best team in the league as the starting point. Obviously, they did a lot of things right to get there, including managing the draft well. So it's hard to really point to a lack of fifth-round wide receivers as some differentiating factor that would have propelled the Ravens to the Super Bowl in either of the last 2 years. The Ravens didn't win the Super Bowl either of the last 2 years because of their own mistakes. They couldn't get out of their own way in the playoffs. They had 3 turnovers at Buffalo, and they had the problems in the game against Kansas City as well, in terms of including the fumble at the goal line and
3 turnovers in that game also. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I don't think there's a fifth-round wide receiver. Boy, if we had him, everything would be different right now. And the Ravens would have 2 more trophies in there, and Lamar would have 2 rings, and it would all be peaches and cream right now. I don't see it that way. They did have the best roster. I think the front office did absolutely everything they could to put together a great roster that did not sacrifice the future in each of these last 2 years.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And you're exactly right. The one thing I didn't say is, taking a step back, the Ravens absolutely have the best roster in the league 3 straight years. However they got there, right? DaCosta is a great drafting GM and a great GM, period. And right, this is where I ended up, is that absolutely, you're 100% right. Like, no, the Ravens did not ultimately sacrifice anything for their current build by taking these shots. And the thing that makes the Ravens and DaCosta is that he's going to take these late round shots all over the place, and he's going to hit on guys like Tavius Robinson in the 4th round, or we could go on. And yes, for every Caillou Kelly or Devin Leary, there's also guys that they've hit on year after year. And so all of that to say, right, I mean, I came in with kind of my mind focused on this one thing, but now taking a step back, like you really can't quibble with the way that they've gone about things. And no, I mean, I think I'm super happy, obviously, with where the Ravens roster is right now. And no, short of drafting Puka Nacua, who probably wouldn't have been Puka Nacua on the Ravens anyway, you can't take issue with too many of their decisions.
Okay, well, I'm in agreement that the roster for the current Ravens roster is outstanding, and it's it certainly has gotten here by hook or crook to this point where it's hard to find a true flaw with the way things were done. And the one thing I would say, I guess, is that they trying to go to a deeper set of wide receivers is a double-edged sword. That if you expend picks, then you kind of expend the developmental requirements on that player, meaning you can't get rid of him right away easily. And they did with Scott and Lasley. They got rid of those 2 guys pretty easily because, frankly, those guys made it easy for them to get rid of them. Jaleel Scott played like crap in the preseason. The first year, he hung around at camp in the second year and was gone pretty quickly. And Lasley threw the ball into the pond, and that was the end of his time in Baltimore effectively. Right. So you're beholden to that pick once you make it. And sometimes the pick takes a while to pay off. Tylan Wallace took a while to pay off, but he's paid off very well in terms of what he's done for the Ravens. Devontae Walker played 11 straight games, or 11 out of 12 to end the season, where he played well on special teams. And we finally saw, 1 catch out of him for a touchdown. But we
nice catch.
Yeah, well, it was a nice catch, but it was also a design play to get him open. It was a specific,
absolutely.
Thing. It's not he didn't build extended play chemistry with Lamar or anything like that. That he we have a specific reason to believe he's going to be additionally successful. I think he has a host of challenges actually going forward, with one gigantic one being needs to have a complementary route to run with his verticals. He needs to have some sort of comeback route that he can sell to a cornerback when he wants to go vertical. And because he's a bigger receiver, he has some problems with that in terms of the salesmanship he has available to himself as opposed to his Zay Flowers. The topic for another show. But anyway, really like LeJohntay Wester because he's more like Flowers in his ability to cut without sinking his hips terribly much and giving away too much to that defender. But it's an interesting discussion because the Ravens, they haven't really been consistent in over their whole history in terms of how they've approached it. But they've had, some success in terms of what they've done with receivers.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing we didn't talk about that you started to hit on there, which with special teams, is there's so much that goes into the wide receiver position, especially if you're not one of the starting quote unquote 2 or 3 receivers that you have to do to stay on an NFL roster. And that's what makes Tylan Wallace such a great success story, because he does everything you would possibly want from a receiver that isn't going to be your top 2 or 3. The one thing also that about the current Ravens build or looking to last season is that you did see that depth strained just a little bit on the final drives against Buffalo. That wasn't the thing that limited them in that game, of course, but you're looking at Anthony Miller and Tylan Wallace and Nelson Aguilar as your kind of trio out there on the one drive where you have to have it. Now, they had it, so you can't, again, they got it. So again, all of that to say, Lamar Jackson is just an incredible player, and the tight end situation, obviously we haven't really touched on, but the Ravens would like to get 2 tight ends out there the entire Lamar era. And they've done a great job with that. And I was actually looking at 2018, 2019 Ravens, and they had 4 good tight ends on those teams that they were just rotating all the time. And they've kind of continued that build through the 2020s. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways to approach this. I think there's a lot that we'll never know about the decision-making process. And I think ultimately things are trending in the direction that I was hoping for, which is just kind of keep taking those late round shots and making sure your back end of that room has some investment in it, has the ability to build, with a quarterback like Lamar.
All right, let's finish it with this here. How would you grade the DaCosta era draft of wide receivers? Scale of 1 to 10, 8.5, whatever you want to do.
I think I would say it's been a solid B, honestly. It's hard to separate eras out because, you have kind of the few what I would call almost dead years in the, 2015 to 2019 range. I think the Ravens have mitigated their drafting approach with a crazy amount of veteran receivers, which again is a topic for another show, just the sheer amount of late in their career veterans they went with. But I think, starting with the Hollywood pick in 2019, they've clearly put a nice investment into this. And I consider the Bateman and Flowers picks to be, I would call them A's, honestly, maybe not A plus, obviously, but all of that to kind of build this nice diverse room that they have now, which is kind of where I started with this. So I'm curious what you're thinking here.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Obviously, maybe they didn't do as well as we'd hope in 20. But it's easy to pick a year in which at a position that a team really didn't draft well. They took 2 receivers in 20, and I wouldn't say they got a lot of value out of Devin Duvernay or Proche. Proche,
Right.
Devin Duvernay, the 3rd round pick, is that unreasonable that a 2-time Pro Bowler or whatever he was is not really a great value pick? He was probably okay, for a 3rd round pick,
Right.
Not great, not terrible. But obviously Proche is not a lot of value to get for any pick, really.
And by the way, you look at 2020 and 2021 drafts, and the second rounds are just littered with guys that you've either never heard of or out of the league already. And the teams that did make those investments were probably proved wrong. And hindsight's always 2020. But that's really why I liked this topic, because it's so fascinating to look at these drafts 2 years out, 5 years out, things like that.
Really good point. I mean, a lot of people wanted Denzel Mims instead of Jake
Exactly.
Goddard.
Exactly.
And that's a perfect example of one. Van Jefferson, he's been a little bit better than that in his career, but still a guy who, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'd want him over Dobbins, given what Dobbins' injury history has been, but it's not a really exciting pick either, honestly.
Correct. Yeah.
It's great talking about this with you. Certainly some seed for some discussion. If you're listening to this and you'd like to talk about what's the real problem that you see with the Ravens drafting or development of wide receivers, comment on this when it's posted. And we'd love to hear from you. I'm sure Ben and I will both have some things to say. Ben, we appreciate you coming on. Where can people talk football with you?
Yeah, I'm still hanging on to Twitter, looking to talk football and not much else there at Classic Mihal, Classic Mihal. Looking forward to doing a few more pods with you, Ken, and just talking Ravens in general.
All right. Ben hit me up with a couple great ideas for pods, and we're going to talk about those over the next few days. Have some other good ones that have come in. But I have time right now. Before camp starts, I have time to record some more and have them actually trickle in camp off days and whatnot that'll be coming in late July and early August. So I still got a little time. Hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. Ben, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.